The power company truck rolled up to my house at exactly 8:00 a.m. I watched from my kitchen window as Corinne Thompson stood on my front lawn, clipboard in hand, supervising like a general commanding her troops. Her smile was the kind you see on someone who has been planning this moment for months. The technician looked uncomfortable as he approached my electrical meter. Corinne pointed directly at my solar panels and said something that made him nod reluctantly. I felt my stomach drop as I realized what was happening. They were actually going to do it. After 30 years of building my business from nothing, after becoming the largest solar energy supplier in the region, this HOA president was about to shut off my power over a neighborhood dispute. I stood there frozen, watching my perfect life about to be destroyed. What Corinne did not know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her entire life. My name is David Chen, and 3 years ago I thought I had finally made it. After spending 3 decades building my solar energy company from a small garage startup into the largest renewable energy supplier in our region, I was ready to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I found the perfect house in Meadowbrook Estates, an upscale community with tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and the kind of peaceful suburban atmosphere I had dreamed about during all those years of 16-hour workdays. The neighborhood was everything the real estate agent had promised. Every house looked like it belonged in a magazine, with perfect landscaping and architectural harmony that made you feel proud just to drive through the gates. The homeowners association kept everything pristine, and honestly, I appreciated that level of attention to detail. I had worked too hard to live somewhere that did not reflect success. When I moved in, I met Corinne Thompson on my very first day. She appeared at my front door with a welcome basket and a warm smile, introducing herself as the HOA president. Corinne was a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident demeanor that suggested she was used to being in charge. She seemed genuinely excited to welcome me to the community. "We are so pleased to have someone of your professional caliber joining Meadowbrook," she said, handing me a thick folder of HOA documents. "I did some research on your company, and I must say, your success in renewable energy is quite impressive." I was flattered by her attention and grateful for what seemed like a genuine welcome. Corinne explained the community standards, the architectural review process, and the various committees that kept everything running smoothly. She even offered to fast-track my application for the custom solar installation I was planning for my new home. The solar panel installation was important to me, both professionally and personally. As someone who had spent his career promoting clean energy, I wanted my home to showcase the latest technology. The system I designed was state-of-the-art, with high-efficiency panels that would generate more power than my house could use. The excess energy would feed back into the grid, which seemed like a perfect demonstration of how renewable energy could benefit entire communities. Corinne seemed fascinated by the technical details when I explained the system to her. She asked detailed questions about the installation process, the maintenance requirements, and how the panels would integrate with the neighborhood's electrical infrastructure. At the time, I thought she was simply being thorough in her role as HOA president. What I did not mention during our friendly conversation was the scope of my business operations. My company, Chen Solar Solutions, had recently signed a major contract to supply clean energy to the regional power grid. We were not just installing residential solar systems anymore. We had become the primary renewable energy supplier for a network that included over 200,000 homes and businesses, including the entire electrical grid that powered Meadowbrook Estates and 16 surrounding communities. I kept this information private because I preferred to let my work speak for itself rather than boasting about business achievements. I had no idea that this discretion would later become the key to everything that followed. The first few months in Meadowbrook were exactly what I had hoped for. I enjoyed the quiet streets, the friendly neighbors, and the sense of community that came with living somewhere that people clearly cared about. Karen would wave whenever she saw me working in my yard, and she always had updates about community events or upcoming HOA meetings. Looking back now, I can see the signs that I missed at the time. Karen's questions about my solar panels never quite stopped. She would find reasons to walk by my house during the installation process, always with some friendly comment about the progress. She asked about permit numbers, contractor certifications, and whether I had received proper architectural approval for every component. At the time, I thought she was simply being conscientious. I had no idea she was building a case against me. The first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 6 months after I had moved in. I found it tucked into my front door, printed on official HOA letterhead with Karen's signature at the bottom. The subject line read, "Violation Notice Mailbox Positioning Noncompliance." I stared at the document in confusion. According to the notice, my mailbox was positioned 3 inches too far from the curb according to HOA standards. 3 inches. I had to read it twice to make sure I was not misunderstanding something. The notice demanded that I correct the violation within 10 days or face escalating fines. I walked out to my mailbox with a tape measure, thinking there must be some mistake. The mailbox was exactly where the previous homeowner had placed it, in the same position it had been in for over 15 years. I measured the distance to the curb 3 times. Karen was technically correct about the 3 inches, but this seemed like an incredibly minor issue to warrant official action. I decided to handle it professionally. I moved the mailbox and sent Karen a polite email confirming that the violation had been corrected. I thought that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, another notice appeared. This time, it was about my grass height. According to Karen's measurements, my front lawn exceeded the maximum height allowed by HOA standards by half an inch. Half an inch. I had to get down on my hands and knees with a ruler to even see what she was talking about. The notices kept coming with clockwork regularity. My holiday decorations were left up one day past the approved removal date. My garbage cans were visible from the street for an extra hour after pickup. My car was parked 6 inches over the invisible boundary line that separated my driveway from my neighbors. Each violation was technically accurate, meticulously documented, and completely unreasonable. What disturbed me most was the surveillance aspect. For Karen to catch these violations, she had to be watching my property constantly. She was taking photographs, making measurements, and documenting my daily activities with an attention to detail that felt invasive and obsessive. I started paying closer attention to Karen's behavior around the neighborhood. During my morning coffee, I would see her walking past my house with her phone out, always seeming to find some reason to linger near my property. She would stop to examine my solar panels, take pictures of my landscaping, and measure distances with a small tape measure she carried in her pocket. The situation escalated at the monthly HOA board meeting in May. I had been attending these meetings regularly, partly to stay informed about community issues and partly to demonstrate that I was a responsible neighbor despite the constant violation notices. The meetings were usually boring affairs, with discussions about landscaping contracts and community event planning. This particular meeting was different. When Karen reached the new business section of the agenda, she stood up and addressed the room with a serious expression. "I want to discuss a compliance issue that affects our entire community," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to commanding attention. "We have a resident who has installed what I can only describe as commercial-grade solar equipment without proper architectural review." My blood ran cold as I realized she was talking about me. Every head in the room turned in my direction. Corinne continued her presentation with charts and photographs that she had obviously prepared in advance. She showed pictures of my solar panels from multiple angles, highlighted the technical specifications, and compared my installation to what she called standard residential systems. These panels are larger, more numerous, and more industrial in appearance than anything we have previously approved, Corinne explained to the captivated audience. "I have concerns about whether this installation complies with our architectural standards and whether it sets a precedent that could affect property values throughout Meadowbrook." I stood up to respond, keeping my voice calm and professional. I explained that my solar installation had received proper architectural approval before installation, that it met all local building codes, and that it was designed to be as visually unobtrusive as possible. I mentioned that the system was actually helping to reduce the community's overall carbon footprint. Corinne smiled at my response, but it was not a friendly smile. "Mr. Chen," she said, "I appreciate your environmental consciousness, but we have standards in this community. I will be conducting a thorough review of your installation to ensure it meets all HOA requirements." As I drove home that night, I realized that Corinne was not going to stop. This was not about mailbox positioning or grass height anymore. She had set her sights on my solar panels, and she was building a case to force me to remove them. What Corinne did not know was that she had just declared war on someone who had more resources and determination than she could possibly imagine. Corinne disappeared for 3 weeks after the board meeting, and the sudden absence of violation notices felt ominous rather than peaceful. I knew she was planning something, but I had no idea how sophisticated her strategy would be until the certified letter arrived on a Thursday morning in June. The envelope was thick, official, and marked "Urgent HOA Compliance Matter." Inside, I found a 20-page document that took my breath away. Corinne had not been taking a break from harassing me. She had been building a legal case with the thoroughness of a federal prosecutor. The document was titled Architectural Review Board Decision Solar Installation Noncompliance. Corinne had discovered an obscure section of the HOA covenants that classified any commercial-grade equipment on residential properties as a violation of community standards. She had spent weeks researching legal precedents from other HOA disputes, consulting with the association's attorney, and building a case that my solar installation constituted commercial equipment that was inappropriate for a residential community. The legal analysis was surprisingly sophisticated. Corinne had found 3 similar cases in other states where homeowners had been forced to remove solar installations that exceeded certain size and capacity thresholds. She had obtained technical specifications for my solar panels and compared them to what she defined as standard residential equipment. She had even commissioned an independent architectural review that concluded my installation was inconsistent with the visual harmony of the neighborhood. What impressed me most was her political maneuvering. Corinne had individually met with each member of the HOA board, presenting her case in private before bringing it to an official vote. She had framed the issue not as personal harassment, but as a principled defense of community standards that would protect everyone's property values. The document included signed statements from 3 neighbors expressing concern about the industrial appearance of my solar installation. I recognized the names, but was surprised that people I had considered friendly acquaintances had been willing to support Corinne's campaign against me. She had clearly been working behind the scenes to build a coalition. The most damaging section was Corinne's consultation with the local power company. She had contacted their compliance department and raised questions about whether my solar installation met all residential codes and safety standards. The power company had responded with a formal letter stating that while my installation was currently compliant, any system that exceeded certain output thresholds could be subject to additional commercial regulations. Corinne had taken this response and twisted it into evidence that my installation was inappropriate for a residential setting. She argued that if the power company was treating my system differently from standard residential installations, then the HOA had grounds to classify it as commercial equipment. The final section of the document was a formal demand for immediate action. The Architectural Review Board, which consisted of Corinne and two allies she had cultivated over the years, had voted unanimously to classify my solar installation as non-compliant with community standards. I was given 30 days to either modify the installation to meet residential standards or remove it entirely. The consequences for non-compliance were severe. If I failed to take action within 30 days, the HOA would pursue all available remedies to ensure compliance. This included the possibility of working with the local power company to disconnect electrical service to my property until the violation was resolved. I read the document 3 times, trying to process the implications. Corinne had outmaneuvered me completely. She had turned my pride in renewable energy technology into a legal liability. She had used the very success of my solar installation as evidence that it did not belong in her neighborhood. The formal hearing was scheduled for the following week. Corinne had arranged for the HOA's attorney to be present, along with the independent architectural reviewer she had hired. I was welcome to bring my own representation, but the tone of the document made it clear that the decision had already been made. I spent the weekend consulting with attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. What I learned was not encouraging. HOA covenants gave associations broad authority to regulate the appearance and use of properties within their jurisdiction. Corinne's legal strategy was sound, even if her motivations were personal. She had found a legitimate legal pathway to force me to remove the solar panels that had become the symbol of everything she disliked about my presence in her community. The hearing was a formality. Corinne presented her case with charts, photographs, and legal precedents. Her attorney cited relevant state laws and HOA regulations. The independent architectural reviewer testified that my installation was substantially different in scale and appearance from typical residential solar systems. I tried to argue that my installation was beneficial to the community and complied with all relevant codes, but Corinne had prepared responses for every point I raised. She had turned this into a legal proceeding rather than a neighborly discussion, and she held all the advantages. The board's unanimous vote was no surprise. I had 30 days to remove my solar installation or face disconnection of electrical service to my property. Corinne had won, and she knew it. As the hearing concluded, she approached me with a sympathetic expression that did not hide her satisfaction. "I hope you understand this is not personal, David," she said. "We simply have to maintain standards." I nodded politely, but inside I was making a different kind of calculation. Corinne had just forced me to reveal my hand in a game she did not even know we were playing. The 30 days that followed the hearing were the most frustrating of my professional life. I exhausted every legal avenue I could find, consulting with attorneys who specialized in renewable energy law, HOA disputes, and constitutional property rights. The unanimous opinion was that Karen had built a solid legal case within the framework of HOA authority. I filed formal appeals with the State Architectural Review Board and the local zoning commission. I requested mediation through the County Dispute Resolution Office. I even contacted my state representative about potential legislation to protect renewable energy installations from HOA interference. Every door I tried to open led to the same conclusion. The HOA had acted within their legal authority, and my options were limited. The worst part was watching Corinne's daily victory laps. She made a point of walking past my house every morning, always with that satisfied smile that said she knew exactly how much trouble she had caused me. She posted updates on the community Facebook page about maintaining architectural standards and protecting property values. She had turned my situation into a cautionary tale about the importance of following proper procedures. On the morning of day 31, I watched from my kitchen window as the power company truck arrived at exactly 8:00 a.m. Corinne was already waiting on my front lawn, clipboard in hand, dressed like she was attending a formal ceremony. She had invited 2 other board members to witness what she clearly considered her greatest triumph as HOA president. The technician looked uncomfortable as he approached my electrical meter. This was obviously not something he enjoyed doing, but he had his orders. Corinne pointed at my solar panels and explained something about HOA compliance requirements. The technician nodded and began the process of disconnecting my power. I felt a surge of anger as I realized Corinne was not just supervising the disconnection. She was recording it with her phone, capturing footage of my humiliation for her personal archives. This was not about community standards anymore. This was about power, control, and the satisfaction of destroying someone who had refused to submit to her authority. The actual disconnection took less than 10 minutes. The technician sealed my electrical meter and handed me a formal notice explaining the conditions for reconnection. I would need to provide written certification from the HOA that all violations had been resolved before the power company would restore service. As the truck drove away, Corinne approached my front door with an expression of mock concern. "I hope you understand this could have been avoided if you had simply followed the proper procedures," she said. "The board is willing to work with you on finding a solution that meets community standards." I nodded politely and closed the door, but inside I was calculating the real cost of what Corinne had just done. No electricity meant no air conditioning in the middle of summer. It meant no refrigeration, no internet, no ability to work from my home office. It meant living like a refugee in the house I had bought as a symbol of my success. The immediate impact was devastating. I had to throw away hundreds of dollars worth of food that spoiled in my powerless refrigerator. I had to cancel business meetings that I had planned to conduct from my home office. I had to install a generator just to maintain basic comfort in the July heat, which violated noise ordinances that Corinne was quick to report to the city. What made it worse was Corinne's social media campaign. She posted photos of my house with the caption, "Success, another victory for community standards." She shared articles about the importance of architectural compliance and the dangers of allowing commercial equipment in residential areas. She had turned my personal crisis into a public relations campaign for her vision of neighborhood management. Corinne checked on my property daily, always finding some excuse to walk by, and confirmed that I had not found a way to reconnect power. She carried a small camera and documented any changes to my solar installation or electrical setup. She was clearly enjoying every moment of my discomfort. The harassment extended beyond the power disconnection. Karen began citing me for other violations that she claimed were related to my non-compliant electrical situation. My generator was too loud. My extension cords were visible from the street. My trash was spoiling faster without refrigeration, which created odor issues that violated community standards. But during those miserable, sweltering nights without air conditioning, I had time to think clearly about my situation for the first time in months. Karen had been so focused on her personal vendetta against me that she had made a critical tactical error. She had assumed that I was just another homeowner who could be bullied into submission through HOA procedures. What Karen did not know was that she had just shut off the power to the home of the person who controlled the electrical supply for her entire region. She had declared war on someone who had been fighting much bigger battles in the energy industry for 3 decades. She had humiliated someone who had the resources and legal authority to turn her small neighborhood dispute into a regional crisis. As I sat in my dark, hot house on that first night without power, I made a decision that would change everything. Karen had taught me that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to show them what real power looks like. The next morning, I made a phone call that would turn Karen's victory into the biggest mistake of her life. The call I made that morning was not to another lawyer or a mediation service. I called Michael Rodriguez, the regional operations director for the power company that had just disconnected my electricity. Michael and I had been working together for 2 years on the largest renewable energy contract in the state's history. "David, I heard about what happened with your HOA situation," Michael said when I reached him. "I have to tell you, when I saw the work order come through to disconnect power at your address, I thought there might be some mistake." That was when I realized Karen had no idea what she had done. In all her research about my solar installation, she had never discovered the scope of my business relationship with the power company. She knew I owned a solar company, but she had never bothered to find out that Chen's Solar Solutions was the primary renewable energy supplier for the entire regional grid. "Michael," I said, "I need you to pull up the infrastructure maps for the Meadowbrook area. I want to show you something interesting." What Michael found in the power company's database was the key to everything that would follow. The electrical grid that supplied power to Karen's neighborhood, along with 16 surrounding communities, was dependent on a network of solar installations that my company had built over the past 5 years. We were not just a vendor or contractor. We were the primary energy supplier for over 200,000 homes and businesses. The contract I had signed with the power company included specific clauses about grid stability and energy supply reliability. Any disruption to our solar operations that affected the regional power supply would trigger immediate emergency protocols. The power company was legally required to investigate any interference with renewable energy infrastructure that could impact grid performance. "David," Michael said, "if there are safety concerns about your residential installation, that could potentially affect your company's commercial operations in the region. We might need to conduct a comprehensive review of all your installations to ensure compliance with safety standards." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. Karen's attack on my residential solar installation had given me legitimate grounds to raise questions about the entire electrical infrastructure that powered her community. If there were compliance issues with my residential system, then the power company would need to verify that all of my commercial installations met the same standards. I spent the next 2 days reviewing my contracts with the power company and consulting with energy attorneys who specialized in grid regulation and renewable energy law. What I discovered was that Karen had handed me unprecedented leverage in our dispute. The power company's renewable energy contracts included specific protections for solar installations that were critical to grid stability. Any interference with these installations by local authorities required formal review and approval by state regulatory agencies. Karen's HOA action against my residential system could potentially be classified as interference with critical energy infrastructure. More importantly, the emergency protocols in my contracts gave me the authority to temporarily suspend power supply to specific areas if there were safety concerns about grid stability or regulatory compliance. This was designed to protect the electrical grid during emergencies, but it could also be triggered by compliance disputes that affected renewable energy operations. The legal framework was complex, but the practical implications were simple. If I raised legitimate concerns about regulatory compliance in the Meadowbrook area, the power company would be required to investigate. During that investigation, they would need to ensure grid stability by potentially interrupting power supply to affected areas. Karen had been so focused on using the HOA's authority to control my residential installation that she had never considered how my commercial operations might respond to her actions. She had treated this as a neighborhood dispute when it was actually a conflict with critical energy infrastructure. I called my attorney and explained the situation. Within hours, we had drafted a formal notice to the power company raising concerns about regulatory inconsistencies and safety issues related to renewable energy installations in the Meadowbrook service area. The notice cited specific clauses in our supply contract and requested immediate review of all installations to ensure compliance with state and federal regulations. The notice also included a request for temporary suspension of power supply to the affected area during the compliance review, citing safety concerns about grid stability and the need to ensure that all installations met current regulatory standards. Michael called me back within 2 hours of receiving our formal notice. "David, this is going to trigger our emergency protocols," he said. "If you are raising safety concerns about installations in that area, we will need to shut down power to the entire district while we conduct the review." "How long would that review take?" I asked. "Could be 48 hours, could be longer depending on what we find," Michael replied. "But I have to tell you, if there are legitimate safety concerns, we cannot restore power until they are resolved." That evening, I sat in my dark house and drafted the 48-hour notice that would be sent to all residents in the affected area. The notice would explain that due to safety concerns related to renewable energy infrastructure compliance, power would be temporarily interrupted while the utility company conducted a comprehensive review of all installations in the district. Karen had taught me an important lesson about power and authority. She had shown me that sometimes the only way to deal with someone who abuses their position is to demonstrate what real authority looks like. Tomorrow morning, Karen would discover that shutting off my power was the biggest mistake she had ever made. The 48-hour notice went out at 6:00 a.m. on a Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail to every address in the affected service area. The notice was printed on official power company letterhead and signed by Michael Rodriguez as Regional Operations Director. "Notice of Temporary Power Interruption, Renewable Energy Compliance Review," read the bold headline. The text explained that due to safety concerns related to renewable energy infrastructure in your service area, electrical power would be temporarily interrupted starting at 8:00 a.m. on Saturday morning, while the utility company conducted a comprehensive review of all solar installations and grid connections. The notice estimated that the review would take a minimum of 48 hours, but warned that restoration of service would depend on the resolution of all identified compliance issues. Residents were advised to make appropriate preparations for the extended power outage. What made the notice particularly effective was its official tone and legitimate regulatory justification. This was not revenge or retaliation. This was a formal safety review triggered by compliance concerns about renewable energy infrastructure. The power company was following established emergency protocols to ensure grid stability and regulatory compliance. I spent Friday morning watching Corinne's reaction from my kitchen window. She appeared at her front door at exactly 8:15 a.m., still in her bathrobe, holding the certified notice with an expression of complete shock. She read it 3 times, then immediately pulled out her phone and began making frantic calls. By 10:00 a.m., Corinne was in full crisis mode. She had called the power company's customer service line, the regulatory compliance office, and the emergency services department. Each call led to the same response. The power interruption was being conducted under established safety protocols, and restoration would depend on the resolution of identified compliance issues. The genius of the situation was that Corinne could not attack the legitimacy of the power company's action without admitting that her own actions against my solar installation had been purely vindictive. The notice cited specific regulatory concerns about renewable energy compliance in the service area. If Corinne claimed that these concerns were not legitimate, she would be admitting that her own HOA action against my installation had been based on false premises. Saturday morning arrived with perfect summer weather. At exactly 8:00 a.m., the power went out across 16 neighborhoods, affecting over 30,000 homes and businesses. Corinne's entire political base was suddenly without electricity, air conditioning, refrigeration, or internet access. The timing could not have been worse for Corinne. Saturday was the community's annual summer festival, an event she had been planning for months as a showcase of her leadership as HOA president. Instead of celebrating her success, she spent the day fielding angry phone calls from neighbors who blamed her for the crisis. What Corinne did not understand was that the power company's emergency protocols required them to investigate any compliance concerns about renewable energy infrastructure that could affect grid stability. My formal request for review had triggered a systematic examination of all solar installations in the affected area, starting with my residential system and extending to the commercial installations that supplied power to the regional grid. By Saturday afternoon, Corinne had figured out that I was somehow connected to the power outage. She appeared at my front door at 3:00 p.m., no longer bothering to maintain her polite facade. Her face was red with anger and frustration as she demanded to know what I had done. "David, I know you are behind this somehow," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is insane. You cannot just shut off power to the entire neighborhood over a personal dispute." I invited her into my living room, which was comfortably cool thanks to my generator-powered air conditioning. I offered her a cold drink from my generator-powered refrigerator. The contrast between my comfortable situation and the crisis affecting the rest of the neighborhood was impossible to ignore. "Corinne," I said calmly, "I have not shut off anyone's power. The utility company is conducting a safety review of renewable energy installations in this area. I assume this is related to the compliance concerns that were raised about my solar system." "What compliance concerns?" Corinne demanded. Your system was perfectly safe until we required you to remove it. That is exactly the problem, I replied. If my residential installation posed safety concerns, then the power company needs to review all similar installations in the area to ensure grid stability. This is standard emergency protocol for renewable energy infrastructure. Karen stared at me as the implications began to sink in. She had created a regulatory crisis by attacking my solar installation without understanding how it connected to the broader electrical infrastructure. Her personal vendetta had triggered safety reviews that affected the entire regional power grid. "How long is this going to last?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That depends on how quickly the compliance issues can be resolved," I said. "The power company needs to ensure that all renewable energy installations in the area meet current safety standards before they can restore service." Karen tried to argue, to threaten, to negotiate. She offered to reverse the HOA's decision about my solar panels. She promised to drop all violation notices and leave me alone. She even offered to resign as HOA president if I would somehow make the power come back on. But I explained that this was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was a regulatory compliance issue that was being handled by the power company under established emergency protocols. I had no more control over the situation than she did. As Karen left my house that evening, she looked like a defeated general retreating from a battlefield she had never understood. She had spent so much energy fighting me that she had never bothered to learn who she was actually fighting. The next morning, she would discover that her problems were just beginning. Sunday morning brought an emergency HOA board meeting that Karen had not called. The other board members, along with a delegation of angry neighbors, had demanded an immediate gathering to address the crisis that had left the entire community without power for over 36 hours. I was formally invited to attend the meeting as the only resident who seemed to have any connection to the power company's compliance review. When I arrived at the community center, powered by portable generators that cast harsh shadows across the room, I found Karen sitting alone at the front table while nearly 50 neighbors filled the folding chairs behind her. The mood was hostile, but not toward me. These were people who had lost food to spoiled refrigerators, suffered through sweltering summer heat without air conditioning, and missed family gatherings because of the power outage. They wanted answers, and they had figured out that Karen's campaign against my solar installation had somehow triggered the crisis. Board member Janet Collins, who had previously supported Karen's actions, stood up to address the room. "We have learned that the power company's compliance review was triggered by regulatory concerns about renewable energy installations in our area," she announced. "These concerns appear to be directly related to the HOA's recent action against David Chen's solar system." The room erupted in angry voices. Neighbors who had signed Karen's petition against my installation now demanded to know why they had not been told that their actions could affect the entire community's power supply. Others wanted to know how Karen had managed to turn a neighborhood dispute into a regional crisis. Karen tried to defend her actions, but her explanations sounded hollow in the face of the community's suffering. She insisted that she had been protecting property values and maintaining architectural standards. She claimed that she could not have predicted the power company's response to the HOA's compliance action. But the board members had done their own research since the power outage began. They had discovered that I was not just a solar installer, but the owner of the company that supplied renewable energy to the entire regional grid. They had learned that Karen's attack on my residential installation had triggered safety reviews of critical energy infrastructure. The vote to remove Karen as HOA president was unanimous. Even her closest allies on the board had turned against her in the face of the crisis she had created. Janet Collins was elected as interim president, and her first official act was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the community. "David, we want to make this right," Janet said. "We are prepared to reverse all previous violations, drop all fines, and provide written certification that your solar installation meets all community standards. We just need our power back." I accepted their apology graciously and explained that I would work with the power company to expedite the compliance review process. By Monday evening, after the utility company had completed their systematic review of all installations in the area, power was restored to the affected neighborhoods. Karen submitted her resignation from the HOA board the following week. She put her house on the market 2 months later and moved to a different state. The community never forgot the lesson she had taught them about the dangers of letting personal vendettas override common sense. As for me, I finally got to enjoy the peaceful suburban life I had worked so hard to achieve. My solar panels continued to supply clean energy to both my home and the regional grid, and no one ever questioned their compliance with community standards again. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone destroy themselves with their own actions.